Vamos a ver una cosa del Poppy. Vamos a ver una cosa del Poppy 5, que si no ya me quedará muy antiguo y no voy a poder reaccionarlo. Hay un vídeo, que es de hace 2 días, hay un tío que hace vídeos sobre el Poppy 5, bueno, sobre todos los Poppys en general, que ha hecho un vídeo que me llama la atención, quiero comentarlo por aquí. Bueno, quiero verlo y a ver qué cosas dice. Son 14 minutos, lo pongo en 1,6 por ahí, ¿no? Es que no tengo muchísimo tiempo. Así que vamos a verlo y a ver qué comenta. Estoy viendo cosillas, me gusta. Me gusta que me gusta, no sé qué iba a decir, la verdad. He estado viendo cosas sobre speedrun, he estado viendo easter eggs, he estado viendo cosillas. Y la verdad que me parece un buen capítulo. Es que. Al final termina un poquillo y me dejó un poco con esa mala sensación en su momento, ¿no? Después de haberlo jugado. Pero creo que es un buen capítulo, es un capítulo bastante sólido.
Gotten a ton of news, including new interviews with developers discussing the future of the entire franchise, a huge new update to Chapter 5 that fixes one of the game's biggest complaints, a new music video that reveals some big lore
Sobre el vídeo no quiero verlo, ¿vale? Porque aún no he escuchado las canciones, ya en otro momento nos ponemos y escuchamos las canciones.
details, a ton of Chapter 5 behind the scenes on what characters and areas were originally supposed to look like, along
¿Cómo?
with a whole lot more. So,
Vale, esto ya hablas de buenos vídeos, ¿eh? Lo va a resumir bien.
starting with all of the new behind the scenes, there has been an absolute ton. First off, we got all sorts of Lily Love Braids concept art by Katie Stickler, like this one here that shows a full turnaround of her design and how she's meant to look from every angle.
Esto es el concept artist, ¿verdad? Artist. ¿Cómo he pronunciado eso? Concept artist. Espérate, le subo un poco más el volumen, que lo tengo bajito. Ahí. Ahí está.
Along with her hair up here. Then there is this concept art with her in her various different outfits, which while not ever worn by her in the physical game, do appear in the way of her cutouts, which is cool. Plus, in this piece, we get to see her various facial expressions, like when she's irritated, neutral, sad, and everything in between.
Bueno, me parece un trabajo tan guapo. O sea, imagínate, no solo saber dibujar, sino encima como dar con los conceptos para diseñar un personaje así. Yo que he dibujado algunos personajes en general, como obviamente un estilo mucho más simple y tal. Es de verdad tan difícil dar con algo que sea mínimamente funcional. O sea, realmente un trabajo muy complicado. Porque a la que te dan esto, quizás hacerlo en 3D no es tan difícil. Es complicadísimo, obviamente. Yo no sé, no tengo este nivel, pero claro. Pero dar con la idea tú de primeras, buah.
Moving on, Whitney here showed off some concept art for the prototype that was apparently created all the way back in Chapter 2, showing a couple simple designs of his hand, but most importantly, in this image, we get to see that the hand was originally going to have some kind of destroyed jester glove on it, and we can see that his toy, or full body version, was originally going to be some kind of jack-in-the-box toy.
No da miedo. Si no te puede perseguir tanto y es como que está dentro de la caja, no da miedo. Me gusta la cara que tiene, pero sin más, no. Me parece que el modelo del prototipo in-game da mucho miedo. Me parece que está súper bien llevado y me parece un antagonista bastante guapo a nivel diseño. A nivel lore, cómo lo justifiquen después y cómo lo terminan es otra cosa. No lo sé. Pero a nivel diseño, la gente se ha quejado. A mí me gusta mucho. Me parece un gran diseño.
Which is absolutely insane to see, knowing what the prototype
Aunque me parece súper guapo.
would end up looking like.
Dan bastante miedo. Pero el problema es que el juego no te lo presenta muy bien. Hay una parte, hay un minijuego. Hay como el último puzzle que haces antes de pegarte con él y tal. Que es el puzzle del costurero. A mí en ese puzzle, habiéndolo visto que se asomaba como por una ventana y tal, pensando que me podía perseguir, lo pasé muy mal. Porque realmente es un bicho que da miedo. ¿Qué pasa? Que no te lo presentan en escenarios que realmente den mucho miedo. Porque la zona del tren está bien, la persecución del tren, pero no da miedo. Honestamente.
Like today. We also got a few behind the scenes from Malachi, including one of an old jump scare for the prototype, where he grabbed the player and immediately stabbed them in the head, which I personally like a whole lot more than the final one.
Sí, mola muchísimo más que el jumpscare final.
Not that the final one has anything wrong with it, this one just looks even better. He also
En general creo que es un personaje que da mucho miedo y está bastante guapo, pero mal aprovechado en game.
showed off this behind the scenes look of the Huggy entrance sequence that lets us see it without all of the shadows and coloring and everything. Similar to this video he released that shows some behind the scenes of the Huggy vent
Como
class
mola el
cutscene.
modelo y
And
las
finally here
animaciones.
he showed off the animation of the hazmat guy inside of the Huggy dream sequence, all of which looks really cool from this perspective. Next, the 3D animator Kimberly Town showed off a ton of sketches of different characters in the chapter and how they were supposed to move. I won't go over all of them because there's a ton, but she showed off multiple of these artworks for Giblet, Chum Chomkins, and Lily Lovebrain. So pretty neat. She also interestingly showed off a behind the scenes look at the entire train wreck sequence from the ending of Chapter 5, from the crashing of the train to the prototype coming out and stabbing us.
Me parece una escena tan rara, tan mal ejecutada, con tan poca explicación. O sea, te lo encargas, pero entonces te vas corriendo, te persigue, o sea, ha revivido, ¿no? Te persigue, te apuñala, pero luego te lleva, la gente decía que era Poppy a quien llevaba, no, te lleva el jugador, lo confirmaron ellos. Te lleva, te tira un balde con algo y luego vuelves a aparecer en el mismo sitio porque te revive Giblet. O sea, es tan extraño, tan mal ejecutado.
Dropping us into the Poppy Gel,
No
all the way
entendí
to
nada la
Giblet
primera
reminding
vez y
us,
sigo
which
sin
again is
entenderlo. La
another cool
gente no
look
lo
at this
entiende en
stuff that we
general.
don't usually get to see. Next here, we got some behind the scenes from the artist Taylor, who designed Chum Chompkins. First giving us a few in-depth looks at Chum's final
Qué
design.
guay, bro, qué guay.
It's pretty neat, but isn't really anything new. However, what I found the most interesting is that here, she actually showed off an early design of Chum where he
Cómo mola. O sea, mola que no tenga boca. Mola lo del... Lo de esto, pero como concepto, este personaje está súper gracioso.
looked a lot different. In this design, he has a standalone mouth instead of the one on his belly, a Huggy Wuggy bow tie around his neck, and he was even planned to be a wrong side out toy as well, which would have looked absolutely horrific in a good way. Although I do like the cuter, more derpy Chum that we got in the final
Pero sí, me
game, so
encanta
I
este
think they made a
personaje.
good
Es muy
choice.
diferente
Next,
y
Sunny
está
D
súper
gave us
gracioso.
some super cool concept art for Chapter 5. First showing off here what the original design for the bed.
Es que luego comparas estos personajes con el diseño que tienen en Garten of Banban y es que, tío, es... triste. O sea,
This
joder.
skeleton that we opened in Lily Love Braids' dollhouse was going to look like, with various different designs that they chose from, and we got some more in-depth art of the skeleton in this concept art here. Furthermore, in this piece of art, we get to
Tienen el potencial para hacer unas pantallas de carga de Fortnite tan increíbles.
see a concept of what Lily Love Braids' dollhouse was going to look like from the outside, and while we do technically see the house in the game, it has a full model and everything, we never really get a good look at it in the physical title, so I wish there was more of a
Love Roblox?
Vale.
Earn Roblox digital gift cards with Microsoft Rewards.
focus put on this area because it looks quite nice. Here we get some concept art of what looks like the Huggy Sneak area with the projected screen rooms. That looks pretty neat. Here we get some concept art of the train in reanimation. While here we got this concept art of Brad
Wow.
making his
Pero esto es increíble, esto no es un concept art, esto es una puta obra de arte de... Joder,
triumphant return, showing that the room
Yes.
he was in was originally going to look slightly different. Although the most notable thing I see here is definitely right here, where we could see a Huggy Wuggy plush turned wrong side out. That is frankly downright disturbing, and I don't believe we ever see this in the game, but if not, I would have loved for this to have happened because that's some pretty chilling stuff. Next, in this art by Alan, we get to see the quote-unquote stitchery room, which is that one puzzle room towards the end of the game with all of the Automals laying on these machines if you don't remember. That at this point in development looks to be much smaller, and it also appears that Chum and Giblet were supposed to be inside of it, while neither of them are there in the final game. Furthermore, we get a concept art of just the machine itself here, and get to see these quote-unquote surgery beds and how they work in the games as well. They also showed us a 3D model of an early version of this room here, with smiling critters on it instead of Automals. Next, again from Whitney, they actually found some super old concept art that was originally meant for play care in Chapter 3 here, that displays what appears to be an almost paradise
Esto me recuerda más al
tunnel
Chapter
with a
2.
train and a pond and a rainbow arching over the top, which is shockingly very different from the play care that we ended up getting in the final version. I personally like the final a bit more, but this is still super cool to see, especially since somebody pointed out that in the files of Project Playtime, there was a room that looked almost identical to this here, and she confirmed that the idea was planned to be used in Project Playtime, so that would have been insane. But now,
Playtime es que mola mucho, tío. El concepto del juego está guay, pero se vuelve tan repetitivo y ahora mismo hay tan poco contenido y juega tan poca gente. Tío.
moving on from the behind the scenes stuff, there has also been a bunch of other various updates, like that another Wrong Side Out music video was
No quiero ver
released,
eso.
this time by Mob Entertainment, with an entirely different. They confirm the names of the two Automals seen in the chapter, Ragbag being the smiling critter looking one, and Gutter Plush being whatever this thing is meant to be. So now that is confirmed. I don't know
Vale, no quiero verlo.
where Lily would originally complained that the original version of
Vale, esto es la update, ¿no?
face kind of just set us up to be confused and get jump scared a lot.
Sí,
which
la verdad que no
frustrates
está muy
people quite a
bien.
bit. However, playing the game
esa
now, they did
persecución.
fix a lot of these issues. As for one, when going up the stairs where Lily would originally run through the door and jump scare us, the game now slows the player's movement down as she runs out, so we don't just run into her and actually get to see her come out so we know to turn around. They also removed the green hand button on the tuba during the chase.
Eso sí, lo vi.
Over from a previous puzzle because it confused a lot of players into thinking they needed to do something with it when they didn't. There's also been some people
Sí, realmente es que era una persecución bastante poco intuitiva y daba problemas. Entiendo que la gente se quejase.
claiming that there's been changes to the cinematic scenes and the game's lighting, although I haven't gone back to fully replay anything at the moment.
Por cierto, ¿no han matado a Huggy Buggy o qué? Porque se ve cómo se mueve, ¿no? Se ve como Huggy Buggy y Kissimisi se mueven cuando en teoría están muertos, pero a Kissimisi la remata y a Huggy Buggy no. O sea, eso quiere decir que va a volver a aparecer en serio. A ver, a lo mejor si es como aliado y es un rol un poco diferente, pues aún, ¿no? Pero sin más. No sé, creo que no deberían... A lo mejor simplemente no significa nada, pero joder.
So if there's anything like that you noticed, let me know in the comments below. Next, the developers, specifically George Christic, did a couple interviews before the release of Chapter 5 talking about the game, and more interestingly, the future of the franchise after Chapter 5. So first off, in an interview with DualShockers, George was asked, in terms of the future, does Poppy Playtime have future chapters mapped out and an eventual end roughly planned, or are you trying to keep it as open-endable to be expanded indefinitely as possible? And he responded saying, we have a long-term vision for where the story is heading. We know the emotional destination. At the same time, we try to not make the roadmap so rigid that it can't breathe. The world
Esto va a estar años, ¿eh?
has grown alongside the community, and we want to
Todo
honor
esto por
that
mucho
growth
tiempo.
while still working towards a satisfying conclusion.
Vamos, que no termine en el chapter 6, ni en el 7 a lo mejor.
Which I've seen some people use to suggest that there will in fact be more chapters after chapter 6. Although in
Sí,
my
está
opinion,
claro.
I feel like this is more referencing how we learned in chapter 5 that there was multiple locations outside of the base factory.
Que se puede referir a spin-offs y otras cosas, seguro, ¿no? Pero, joder, es que a lo mejor no termina en el 6.
And so I think that's where the story will go afterwards. A little bit more interestingly, in an interview with the games industry, George answers a little bit more.
Pero de verdad que si no quieren terminarlo ya, tienen que innovar algo. Lo que yo no te compro, tío, lo que yo no te compro es que tú me alargues la historia tantísimos capítulos y que lo que sigamos teniendo es a Huggy Buggy, al doctor no sé qué, del ojo en las cámaras y al prototipo. O sea, por favor, es que necesitamos cosas nuevas. No puede ser que sea lo mismo y que ahora me traigan de nuevo al puto doctor. Es que me parece tan fuera de lugar. O sea, me parece tan fuera de lugar, o sea... No tiene ningún sentido. O sea, tú puedes alargarme esto mucho si quieres, vale, ok, pero cámbiame un poco. Hazme ver sitios nuevos o hazme algo, tío. Porque si no, joder, me terminas la puta historia principal y me haces un spin-off. Pero es que no puedes hacer esto, tío. Es que me parece súper pesado. Entiendo que la gente no quiera seguir jugando, honestamente. Hola, Ricato.
Since a super good question he was asked was about how much of the terror of Poppy Playtime was hiding inside of the lore off screen, and George told us that, like we know, there are a ton of lore drops in VHS tapes and audios.
Igual me mola lo que hacen de las cintas VHS, o sea, creo que lo tiene un poco bien planteado para hacer cosas aparte de lo que es el juego como core, ¿sabes?
And notes, which, while this was actually a big criticism of Chapter 5, since most of the explanations for why things exist aren't shown in the game unless you look for the deep secret lore, he actually said here that this wasn't a mistake and was instead an intentional design choice, because something that I always struggled with in the past with some of these other IPs is how they would literally stop the game, stop the action, and then you would have this long cinematic that you could not skip, and it would just lore at you. Sometimes when you're in the flow of a game, you don't want the decision to be taken out of your hands. I'll come back and watch that wonderful cutscene that you spent 50 million on later, but right now I need to get to the next level. Which, despite this being released before any of the Chapter 5 drama, I think this is a great explanation for the lore being more tucked away, and to be honest, I actually think this is a good thing. If you watched my original playthrough for Chapter 5, you might have noticed that I skipped pretty much every lore note and VHS tape I found, because for me, I like to revisit the lore later, but would rather just play the chapter uninterrupted my first time.
Sí, igual.
So maybe it's just a preference
O
thing.
sea, me gusta el lore, pero comérmelo todo en mi playthrough me da un poco de pereza.
But I actually like this. Next, he was asked about the movie with Legendary Entertainment. Specifically, they asked if the movie was going to be animated or live action, to which George said, "We don't know yet. It's really early days, but what I can
Pero esto la movie lo llevan promocionando un montón de años, ¿no?
say is, having worked
Pero ya estaba en sus planes desde hace un montón y que aún no sé en plan ni si va a ser live action o animado.
on adaptations in the past, Legendary
Claro.
have been amazing partners. They really understand the IP, they really care. And it's kind of unique, at least in my experience, that you have partners who are shoulder to shoulder with you on an IP, and they also understand horror. We don't have to lead them by the hand, so it's been wonderful. And then we also have a deal with Scholastic for some print publications. We already have a guidebook that's out now, referencing the orientation notebook, but we're looking forward to publishing more things with them, seemingly confirming, for one, that they actually don't know if the movie will be live action or not, even though I thought they've said in the past that it would be, so who knows, and that there are apparently going to be more books with Scholastic coming in the future, which I'm actually pretty excited for, since there was supposed to be a young adult novel released this year for the game that ultimately got canceled. Then George was asked once again about the future of Poppy Playtime, where he said, "We are trying to plan as far in advance as we possibly can. Obviously, we have a small team and we are an indie studio, so we don't have the luxury of some other IPs, but we do like to see down the road a bit, and I think that is critical for any horror expression or any genre expression. We've seen in the past with certain IPs where they clearly didn't know where they were going, and sometimes they rushed it, and sometimes they didn't have a clean answer. So we're trying to avoid all that. We're asking a lot of questions early, so then our devs know where they're building." So that's another very interesting update about the game and its future, and it sounds like the developers are pretty confident in the direction they're taking the game, supposedly already having expanded the lore far beyond what we've seen so far. So hopefully this is a good sign for Chapter 6 and the future of the franchise. But what do you guys think?
Es que no va a terminar en el Chapter 6. No va a terminar en el Chapter 6, estoy seguro ya. Con esas palabras me vas a alargar esto muchísimo, ¿verdad? Es que estoy... Lo tengo súper claro. Por cierto, déjame revisar rápidamente en speedrun.com. Speedrun. Quiero ver qué ha pasado ahora en el Poppy. Quiero ver cómo van los tiempos. Poppy Playtime 5. Chapter 5. El Proac, lo tiene el Proac. En 39. Hace 2 días. 3 días, 11. Ah, vale, sí, porque esto lo submitean como fechas de antes. Pues habrá que subir alguna run también, ¿no? Habrá que primero terminar alguna. Yo creo que alrededor de hora y media y tal me lo saco sin problema. 100%, sí. 100%. La primera, ¿en cuánto íbamos? Hora y media o así, ¿no? Bueno, es verdad que tuvimos el bug. Es verdad que tuvimos el bug que me acortó un poco una parte y luego no me dejó terminar el juego. Pero pero habrá que hacerlo. O sea, yo en su momento, por ejemplo, yo cuando submité la run de Silson, mi primera run de Silson o así, que no era mi mejor tiempo ni tal, pero era la primera que submiteaba, estuve en top 70 del mundo. Al principio, cuando se abrió el speedrun.com y tal. Luego ya... bueno, no en esta situación, no, porque aquí hay 8 personas literalmente. Y si esto se abrió ayer, supongo. Pero yo, un par de días o así después, que habían bastante personas, pues estaba en un top bastante bueno. History. El Tomek y el Proac ha hecho el World Record. Por 8 segundos. Ah, ok. Pues eso, habrá que verlo. Tengo ganas de ver qué tal. Lo que pasa es que me da un poco de pereza cuando los skips son tan difíciles, tío. Yo en mi run intenté hacer uno que era un poco más sencillito a nivel de, bueno, eso, te sales out of bounds, pero tampoco haces ninguna locura de cambiar FPS de F11, de no sé qué. Joder, habrá que ver de todos modos. Ok, vamos a hacer una cosilla. Y es que voy a abrir ahora mismo el Little Nightmares.